Welcome to the conversation. Judging by the number of books that I'm seeing and the number of talks I'm hearing, it seems that culture must be on everybody's mind. There's a lot of conversation about it. And granted, when you have a strong, positive culture, it's really going to help you do a variety of things that perhaps you're not going to get away with otherwise. So for today, we're talking yet again about the organizational culture. How do you change it? How do you take advantage of it? How do you understand what it is? What advantages does it give you? And we're also going to talk about some of the myths about culture. One of the things I want to talk about is this whole notion of cultural betrayal. So stay tuned. I'm getting ahead of myself. My guest today is Laura Hamill. Laura is an organizational psychologist, an ex-Microsoft director, and a Limeade co-founder. And she also has another business called the Paris Phoenix Group, where she uses, through that business, she advises companies on how to transform their cultures. If that's not enough, Laura hosts a podcast called Happy at Work, which sounds brilliant. I think we all need to tune in, Laura. And so the book we're talking about today is called The Power of Culture, and it's one of the Economist book series. So, Laura, welcome to the conversation.
Oh, thanks so much for having me, Wanda.
It's a pleasure. I'm looking forward to this. Now, I want to know why you're doing culture. But before I do that, why are there suddenly so many people talking about culture? What's driving that?
Yeah, I think the main reason is that we all, I think, have bought in or see the evidence that culture matters, that organizations need to understand their culture. But I think why so many people are talking about it is it's such an enigma, right? There's so much to understand about culture. There's so many question marks we have about culture. There aren't really clear methodologies and pathways around how you transform culture. So it's like this big question mark for people. We know we need to work on it, but how you work on it is still unclear for most organizations.
It makes sense. And how to quantify it or even understand what it is. I can also
Yes.
imagine that as lots of companies are starting to say, no, we have to have everybody back in the office. And I think they're saying we want everybody back in the office because they feel like something is missing. You know,
Yeah.
like there's something in the culture that just isn't working. And I suspect we're having to rethink what the culture of our company is in a hybrid world when everybody's not in. I'm guessing that that's the case, but I don't know.
Yeah.
There are a lot of people. But let me turn to you personally. Why do
Yeah.
you care about this topic? What got you interested in this?
Yeah. So, as you said before in my intro, that I'm an organizational psychologist. And so I've been working for a long time. And what I've really come to realize over my career is that so many things I focus on, if I'm not focusing on culture, I'm still focusing on culture. Anything that I've worked on in my career around employee engagement, around really making sure that HR strategy or business strategy comes to life, it all is connected to culture. And so, from my career perspective, I see culture as being the root cause of most of the things that I've been working on. So that's one way. I was also a chief people officer. And as a chief people officer, I saw the real kind of gap between science, like what I studied as an organizational psychologist, and then what actually happens in organizations and what actually happens in HR, and the real, like, how reactive and not strategic, unfortunately, we often are in organizations. And there's just such a gap between what science says we should be doing from a culture perspective and what the real practice is. And then I think a third layer of this is I've also been an employee. I know what it feels like as a human being to work in a culture where you don't feel valued, don't feel aligned, where everything feels disjointed. And also I've luckily experienced the opposite, where I've worked in a culture where it was energizing and it felt like I was part of something bigger, and it was so beautiful. And so I think all those layers together really made me want to focus on this book around culture, but also my career.
Right. I can see that because regardless what policies and practices and behaviors you try to put in place, they are all colored by the general ambiance, I guess I would say, around you in that office. So I guess that brings us to this next piece, which is, okay, here you have it. How do you define culture? And more importantly, how do you measure it?
Yeah. So it's really about why people do what they do in an organization. And I really believe in Edgar Schein's work around the underlying norms and values and beliefs of an organization. I think the simplest way to think about it is like an iceberg.
Okay.
It's all the stuff that's down deep, that's under the surface, that really drives what you see on the surface. You can think about the surface as being the practices and the behaviors that we see, but why are people doing those things? It's about what's down deep. And so the iceberg to me is a really helpful analogy. I also like to think you've probably heard of the goldfish example of, does a goldfish even know it's swimming in water? You can think about, and I think it's funny that we ask questions like we'll never be able to really
Yeah.
answer. We'll never get the goldfish's response on that. But it is like water. It's what surrounds us. It's there. It's what we're swimming in. But we can't even see. It's so natural to us that we can't even see it, we think.
Yeah.
So I think those are, to me, are helpful ways of thinking about culture. And so your question about measurement and how we
Yeah.
measure it, I think there's some different levels of measurement. I think there's the kind of most basic is, are we able to do the things we need to do as a business? Are we achieving our goals? And to me, if the answer is yes, then maybe you've got something going right. The culture is aligned with what you're trying to achieve. But if the answer is no, that might be, to me, that would be an indicator of whether or not the culture is helping us. Because if you think about culture, what we're really trying to do is get everybody on the same page about what's important, how we work together, how we row our boat in the same direction. And if that culture is not aligned, then it's not very likely that we're going to achieve the goals that we want to achieve. So I think a second level of measurement is around alignment, in that feeling of like we're all on the same page. The third way I like to think about measurement, and this is what I encourage every organization to do, is just explicitly ask about it. Do you understand the culture we're trying to create here? Do people demonstrate the culture? Do you see your peers demonstrating the culture that we say we want to have? Do you see managers? Do you see leaders? And you can start to really get a feel for where the strengths are and where the gaps are when you do that. I'm also seeing more and more companies move to creating culture at a culture index or culture measurement in their employee survey. So that I'm seeing happening more and more and more.
There are, I think today, as opposed to 10 years ago, we have better scales and metrics and questionnaires that you can do, that you can get people to evaluate, that give you a sense of what the culture is like. But I gave you an example. Just yesterday, I was doing a conference, a big presentation, and one of the speakers with me for the day was talking about his company, and he said, at every gateway in an employee's life, so on entry, at onboarding, at a promotion level, at a this, at a that, or at a whatever, on exit, all those big gateways, we ask people to describe freeform our culture.
Nice.
And we look at the words that get used over and over again and look to see that the top five are the top five we want them to be.
Right.
And so we ask senior leaders, we ask middle level leaders, we ask younger leaders, and then again at all those different gateways.
Yeah.
And what was fascinating to me about this big global company is the incredible consistency they had in the top three.
Yes. And I mean, I love that exercise. And are those words, the words, not only the consistency, but are they the words that we've said we've wanted? Are they consistent with our values, right?
Right.
I use a similar exercise in a lot of the workshops I do, to first just ask people, what are the words, that you use to describe your culture? And then pull up your company values and compare the two, right? Is there any overlap at all? So yeah, I love that.
Yeah. I get frustrated. So you're going to react to this one. I get frustrated with the company values thing. So I walk into any number of different countries around the world and I see teamwork, something about teamwork. I see something about collaboration usually these days. I see something about respect in some form or another. And I see something about clients. Yeah. Clients, market positioning, something. And the fifth one I give you is a toss-up. It'll be different. But all of I guess there's integrity or trust in there somewhere is usually one of the ones as well. those feel to me like absolutely total table stakes. Like if there's a company that is
Yes.
not operating with respect and integrity and customer centricity, why are they in business?
Right.
It seems to me the values need to be the things that distinguish us, not the table. But what's your view on that one?
I so agree with you. It's so, think about just how uninspiring that is too for employees. It's like, okay, this is the same values that I just saw in the bakery or the coffee shop I was just at this morning, right? It doesn't differentiate. It doesn't do anything to really help the business succeed and be, be successful. And so I agree with you about the table stakes attitude about values. We really need to get to the point where we're thinking about unique to our business, what differentiates us, what's special about us, what can we do that nobody else can do, and how do we articulate that? And I think to me it's just lazy. It's like lazy work. And it also, you know part of what I've been interested in is also the laziness that happens of just stopping there. Because
Yeah.
that's what most organizations do too, is they just create that list of boring words and they put it
Good
on their
words.
website, and they make yeah, that's true, their integrity, of course, but they make a decal for their behind their receptionist desk, and that's where it stops, and there's
Hmm.
nothing about it that continues, actually is authentic, and that's part of the daily experience of
Right.
employees. So
Right.
I couldn't agree with you more about the same ones for every company.
The few occasions that I've been involved in facilitating conversations around what the values should be, this is not the kind of work that I do, but I certainly get called in to do facilitation. It's not from lack of effort. I think we end up with a basic five because that's what everybody can agree on, which makes it table stakes. So, okay, let's
Yeah.
move on though.
Yeah.
I want to talk for a minute about cultural betrayal. All right,
Yeah.
I love that word. What is it? And give me an example, and then I'll ask you,
Yeah.
how do we fix this?
Yes. So this is something that I started to really notice, I mean, years ago, was the idea of organizations that have values, or that are articulating the culture they're trying to create, and employees are attracted to that organization, right? They
Mm-hmm.
see it on the website, they see a video about it, and they're like, I want to work there. I'm excited about working there. And they go and maybe even hear more about it at orientation, but they start working and they start to realize, wait, this isn't
Isn't that,
this isn't
yeah.
real, right? I'm not really experiencing this. So there's a real kind of disconnect between what they were sold, kind of the bill of goods that they were sold, and what their actual experience is. And so the word betrayal feels very dramatic. And at first I was like, oh, but the more and more I studied it and looked at it, the more it is dramatic, because you felt like you were getting something, that you're buying into something that you never received. And so, what happens when people feel that disconnect, or feel that they were betrayed in this kind of way, is they start to slowly withdraw. I can't trust this organization anymore.
Mhm.
This organization isn't real and authentic like I thought they were. So cultural betrayal is that real disconnect between what I thought the culture was and what the actual
Actual,
experience
right.
of it is. So some examples for that, I think was just told kind of recently. Somebody was telling me about how the company they were working for really focused on their website about growth and professional
Mm-hmm.
development,
Mm-hmm.
and that they supported, that's one of the main things, not only from a values perspective, it was one of their values, but it was all in their benefits too, like,
Right.
this is something that we reinforce. And she got there and she started to, ask about, okay, when does that start, when do I get to do that? And in the beginning they just kind of pushed her off, but after a year, she saw nothing. She kept asking about opportunities to take a class or to go to a conference, and it never was supported. And so that really quickly for her became like, you lied to me. You didn't tell me the truth.
Yeah.
So I think that's one example. I had another about a few months ago of somebody telling me about a company they were in that was really focused on innovation on their from a
Mm-hmm.
from a cultural perspective, and you can imagine where this is going. But they got there and it was the opposite. I mean, it was
Mm-hmm.
so slow and bureaucratic. They had an aspiration to be more innovative, but there wasn't a lot of real work that was being done to make that come to life. And so this employee felt like it was just as stodgy and bureaucratic as, a government company, when he thought it was a place that was going to be really innovative. So
Right.
that is a really important part of this. Is a lot of times our values are very aspirational in nature. We
Yeah.
want to
Yeah.
become those things. And so it's how companies talk about that matters a lot, because you can't just say we are innovative. You say we aspire to be innovative. We need to be innovative for our business for these reasons.
Yeah.
And here's our pathway, our roadmap that we're taking to be able to get to that place.
Yeah.
And we want you to experience that. We're going to try to make that experience real for you.
Right. Right. That makes sense. I certainly have seen this one, and I know think about one client where there was a lot of prep in the positioning of the client in the marketplace. So they're attracting the talent that they want to attract, and a lot of prep around innovation and collaboration and a few other wonderfully, it's going to be a friendly, appealing, you get to work with all sorts of range of people. I mean,
Right.
a lovely proposition and a good proposition because it was helping them attract talent. And then you come in for your first big onboarding session. And in this particular company, they did a few days with the whole cohort coming in. So there was a lot of camaraderie and a lot of, excitement building, all the wonderful good
Right.
things,
Right.
great
Right.
fun. Only that is not what work is like.
Oh,
Their work was not that innovative. It was not that collaborative. It was collaborative in pockets, but not across pockets. The
yes.
camaraderie and the joined up that you experience on onboarding is disintegrated when you get out of it. And it's not that it was a bad place. I want to be really clear. But the disconnect between what you thought you were getting, what you initially experienced, and what really happened, they were losing talent right, left, and center because of that disconnect. And
Right.
anger, and then Glassdoor comments, and a whole bunch of stuff. And I think
Completely.
half of it was a disconnect. Not any real behaviors that were wrong, just disconnect.
Yes. I think that's such a good example, because what we need to think about it, why advertise that you're something that you're not? And so either you change the advertisement and talk about who you really are, or you make the effort to make make it a little more interesting. But that there's so much about expectation setting,
Yeah,
right? And that
yeah,
that's
it's true.
really
It's true.
that is really a big part of this.
Okay. All right. So most of the companies that I interact with are these big global companies
Hmm.
who will have offices in multiple different locations, multiple different countries. Some of those offices will be very large, not all of them. And you find maybe common values, maybe common aspirations around a culture, but you find very local differences.
Hmm.
So, a small office in, say, Singapore versus a massive headquarters office in London or in Zurich are going to be very different feel because of the size and the number of people. But how much is culture really what's happening locally right around me versus what's happening supposedly globally?
Yeah. It's not, to me, and what I've seen in the research that I've done is that it's both, right? Both of those matter. And so I did a big study for a very large tech company where we were convinced that there were going to be big differences, because it was 38 countries that we were in, and we were convinced that every country, the national and geographical culture, was going to influence the local culture in that location. And what we found is that there was a core set of things that were similar across the organization. Now, this is a large tech company that you would know, that you'd say they have a really
Yeah.
strong culture. So
Yeah.
that's one of the reasons why. So to me, in my experience, I've seen that usually of course, there's things that are happening locally and in my day-to-day experience that really influence my belief about what the culture is. And so that matters a ton. And so the local experience is a real experience, and that can be different from the global experience. Yes, but we still have to realize that your manager and your manager's manager are all part of this system too. And so they're being reinforced and encouraged to do the things that fit with the larger organization. And so more than likely, the things that their behaviors and the things that they feel that they're able to do, their how constrained they feel or capped out to be able to offer you new things or do things differently, are all within this system. And so that macro system of the big national the global organization is influencing everybody there. And so it's really the system we're working within. And so you've heard the idea of, bad systems can ruin good people. Or, you can think of the opposite being true too, right? You're working within a system that absolutely will be influencing you. So it's really both, right? Okay. It's the macro and the micro.
Right. That does make a lot of sense to me. I think when people describe what's wrong with the culture and how they feel about the culture, it's much more who they're interacting with in a day-to-day basis. And granted, today, that may be somebody who's local and it may be somebody who's scattered around the world, and there's all of that. But there is that big global, the kind of people we recruit, the kind of people we promote, how we believe we behave, what we can and cannot do, all of those sorts of things as well, have some color. Perhaps not, I'm not as convinced they have as much color as the local experience, but we could debate that. They both matter. All right, so let's move to this question of changing the culture. So I'm going to ask, what do leaders need to be thinking about as they're thinking about building, sustaining, or changing?
Yeah. Well, first they need to understand their own role and their own impact, how they as leaders influence culture. And this is really one of the reasons why I wanted to call my book The Power of Culture, because we need to understand how power influences culture. When we're new to an organization, we look to the people who've made it. And the ultimate people who've made it, right, are the leaders of the organization. And so we look to them to see, well, what are they doing? What do they see? What are they saying? What are they encouraging? And we get lots of messages. Sometimes they're incorrect, but we get lots of messages about what's important. So I'd say first, leaders need to understand that all day long, they're having an impact. They're sending messages about what's important in the culture. So I'd say understand your impact and how culture is being shaped by the different things that you do all day. Also, relatedly, is the walking the talk and talking the talk too. You really, as a leader, need to be talking about culture. You need to be reinforcing it and inspiring people about the culture and really talking about why it's important for the business success, for the culture to come to life. And so that's a big part of it. And then a lot of the book that I wrote is really about all the things that also need to happen. There's this kind of three big phases. I'd call it activate, which is when you teach people about it and inspire people. The second phase is embody. And that's when, how do we make sure everybody, the leaders are embodying the culture and everybody else is too? How do we teach those behaviors and reinforce those behaviors? And then the third phase is embed. How do we embed culture in everything that we do so that it's around us and very consistently experienced? So leaders, you need to kind of figure out where you are in that whole process and start doing the work. And the thing about culture work is that it's never done. It's not like quarterly work that you check off and say, we accomplished that. It's ongoing work. It's an ongoing commitment. My model is in a circle, and those darn circle models, right? That never end.
Keep repeating and then refreshing and reinforcing and then sometimes changing it. So activate, that means we have to have a way of talking about it, which means we have to have some words around it, some metaphors, some symbols, something that help people understand what it is we want out of this culture. Then we have to, you said embody, which is looking really at the behaviors that we're aspiring to have here to exemplify what we've described. And presumably that would mean things like being articulate about those, watching that people that you promote and reward well are actually doing those yourself as a leader, giving feedback around those, asking for those at promotion time, all of those activities that reinforce the idea of those behaviors.
That's right. That's right. And then the last phase, embed, is then, that's more about the practices and the systems, right? We want to make sure not only once people are doing that individually, what about the way we work together and all the ways we are kind of doing meetings, the ways we are thinking about, performance management, the way we serve our customers, all of these practices and systems that we have, how are those working with the culture we're trying to create? Because if they're working against us, it's really hard for individual people to behave their way out of it. We need to make sure the system is aligned.
Right. Yeah, so we say we want collaboration, but we don't have any rooms for people to get together to collaborate in. Or
Exactly.
we don't have any kind of structure to acknowledge the performance of a group of people as
Yes.
opposed to
That's
an individual.
that's
All
the big
of
one.
those pieces. Lots and lots of them.
Yes.
There's lots of those. Well, my pet peeve on this one is we don't actually know what we mean by collaboration. So you have to say what are the behaviors we're looking for in collaboration and not
That's
what
right.
you wish, what you really believe, and what are the trade-offs we're willing to put up with for
Right.
collaboration. Then we can get
Completely.
somewhere. Okay.
Yes.
All right. Can you change a culture?
Yes, you can. It's really
Okay.
hard.
How? Yeah. Okay.
Yes, it's really hard and it takes a long-term commitment. And it's, those three phases I was just talking about, that's how I would say that's how you change a culture. You have to have a leader and a leadership team that is 100% driving this work. I would love to say that it could be a grassroots effort, but in my experience, that just doesn't work. You want people at all levels to be involved and excited, but you have to have people with most power in the organization be the ones that are the voices behind this. And you have to really connect this to the business and what the business is trying to achieve. It can't just be a perk. It can't just be, oh, yay, let's create a good culture here. It has to be, we have to have this culture in order for this organization to succeed.
Right. So I can imagine that you could say a microcosm, like let's say a call center, is going to have its own culture within that call center. But as you look up in the power structures of who gets rewarded, how they get rewarded, why they get rewarded, what they do, what they don't do, what they say, if that is different, then you know that the culture of the whole organization is going to fall much more along the power structures than it is your
Yeah.
microcosm.
Completely. And it's a bit of an uphill battle, right? You can
Right.
try your best as a division lead or a manager to change what's happening. And there's probably, back to our conversation before about local versus or micro versus macro, there are probably some things you can change, but there's going to be this ceiling and
Yeah.
this constraint
Yeah.
that you're going to push your head
Yeah.
up against.
Yeah. I'm thinking about one particular leader, whom I adore, by the way, just for the record, who wanted greater transparency on pay, which sounds to me like a reasonable thing. Now, you don't want to say what everybody in the group is paid, but you could just say, what are the band ranges for
Yeah.
different, like there's a variety of things that you could do. And there was a reason this individual leader wanted to do it for the team because it settled some noise, it created some equity, it created some collaborations, a whole bunch of positive things. But the larger company forbids doing that.
Yes.
So you can't do it. Well, you can do it, but then you're likely to get fired. So, you take,
So you can't really.
you can't, well, you take your chances on which way you
Right.
want to go with that one. Okay, so we can change it, but is this a year process, 2-year process, 5-year process? How long does it take to get it changed if we mean it from the top?
If we mean it, if we're really committed to it, yeah, I'd say it's multi-year,
Okay.
3 to 5. The organizations that I've seen do it, it's taken 3 to 5 years to really feel like they can see the change. But it's still work after that. It's not,
Mhm.
it's not done then either. It continues to be a big emphasis for them.
Right. Well, I can imagine on any culture, if you don't maintain it, it's
Yeah.
going to wobble into some other form so that there's that constant revisiting of the cycles. The
Yes. And just
activate,
going
embody,
back.
and embed. Yeah, make sure we're
Yeah.
on the right place, we're doing the right things. All right, I want to shift to talk about some of the myths
Yes.
or the false expectations that you think are particularly inaccurate. I know you have a couple of favorites here, so just tip me with what's your best.
Yeah. I think the one around, well, this is one that actually is just a practice, is that it becomes an HR, like HR should run culture
Yeah.
work. And I was the head of HR. I love HR. I think HR is an amazing function, one of the most important functions in an organization. But they should not be running the culture work. Again, back to the leader, the CEO should be the head, the chief culture officer. And the HR organization, the HR leader should be right there with them, with that work. But if we have it be an HR thing, it becomes it becomes a perk. It becomes this nice to have. Like when things are good, we'll have a good culture. And that's actually just the opposite of what you want. You want when the things are hardest, when things are really bad, you want to have a good culture. And so you really, it's dangerous to me to say it belongs to HR, it's HR's job, because the disconnect with what's going on with the business overall will happen faster. So that is one of the biggest ones, yeah.
Not to discredit HR, but if you are putting HR as running the culture completely, then you run the risk of it gets disjointed from the day-to-day business decisions, from the strategies, the evolution of the strategies, the needs of the business. And I just think that has to be front and center because that's what drives success in part.
Completely agree with you. And I've seen it happen over and over again where that's the case. So the more that we can make this be a CEO driven work and core functionality of the CEO's role, the better.
Yeah, right. All right. One of the other myths is this notion that it takes a really long time.
Yeah. And
so what do you believe?
I think it's the truth. But I think there are things you can do in the short term to start to make an impact. I think if we're talking about, is the culture completely changing? That's where it takes a lot of time. But there are steps that you can take that don't take a super long time. And the one of them, and we've sort of hinted on this already, the most basic one is, can you articulate the culture you want to have, right? And that's a big gap for lots of organizations, of like, what is it that we really want this to look like? Can we put that down on paper, and can we as a leadership team agree to that, right? Can we all get behind this? But that's possible, right? In a short period of time, you can do that and connect it to what the business is trying to achieve. We need to have this kind of culture for these kinds of reasons. And I really encourage organizations to be super explicit about that connection. It shouldn't just sort of like vaguely be, we need this kind of culture because it would help us be successful. I want to see like that really tight connection. And it probably goes without saying, but one example, that this is an organization that I was working with many years ago, where they were creating a pretty radical shift in their strategy. They were working, it was an insurance company that was trying to become much more innovative and be kind of a market leader in terms of some innovative products and services that they were going to offer. And so they had done a ton of work on the creation of that strategy. The problem was that there was a lot of distrust in the organization, especially at the leadership team level. So it ended up that there was a lot of secrecy between the CEO and the COO. They were really close, and they were whispering all the time and lots of secret meetings. Over time, it ended up that they were having an affair. And the leadership team that was kind of the rest of the leadership team didn't know that at the time, but they knew that something was going on. And there was so much distrust in the system. There was so much fear that the leaders couldn't speak up or bring new ideas to the table or talk about, how they could contribute to this pretty big strategic shift they were trying to have. So the leaders felt that way. You can only imagine how the employees felt. Right. And so that's just maybe a little dramatic example of the disconnect between what you're trying to do strategically and what you really, what the culture is really like. And so this is what I try to get organizations to say, we need to be this way with the culture in order to achieve these kinds of things. Be really explicit about it, talk about it, create the story of that, tell people about it, and inspire people to be part of it.
Right. I can think of all sorts of ways in which that works. I'm going to give you a trivial example. Suppose I know that we're going to win, particularly in a big marketplace or a big product line, by being cost competitive, that the margins are thin and that I've got to watch those at every single turn. Well, you would want an organizational culture that was cost conscious. Yes. I didn't say penny pinching. I said cost conscious. So we thought very carefully about the expenditure. That would make sense as a kind of culture that would support the strategy.
Right.
That's a trivial one. I'm sure people can come up with a much broader one, but it is actually asking, if we're trying to do this in the marketplace, then how do we have a culture that supports that?
Yes. And a lot of times we're confusing to people. We'll have something like being cost conscious side by side with being, innovative, or, something that feels like, oh, I don't know how to make those two things work together. Right. And we do this to people all the time.
Right.
So the leaders really need to create that clarity around what it is we're trying to achieve, and then what that connection is with the culture.
Yeah, we say we want an innovative culture, but the truth is we don't want innovation everywhere. We want innovations in particular places. So some honesty,
Yes.
again, coming back to where we started with this notion about no cultural betrayal, seems to me to be a really valuable point.
Yeah.
All right, if I kind of summarize, it's one, first being really clear about your strategy. What is it you're trying to achieve? And then second, being really clear about what kind of culture supports that, and having words, examples to articulate that, explain that people can relate to. That's the activate piece of your model. And then I want to list what are the behaviors. What am I expecting people to do consistently that will demonstrate that sort of behavior? So now we know what actions we're looking for. And then I want to embed. And that is where I make it a part of all the practices, all the systems, all the structures, the feedback, the promotions, the room naming, I don't know, everything into the waterworks, into the company, so that it is consistent with what we've said we wanted, and then revisit the activate to make sure it stays on track for what we're trying to achieve now as our strategy.
Oh, beautiful.
Great.
Yes.
Great. I love this, Laura. Great conversation. Really like the book. Again, my guest is Laura Hamill. The book is The Power of Culture. And I also love, Laura, we haven't spent a lot of time on it, that you tie culture to the power hierarchy that exists in an organization.
Yes.
It's power hierarchically and it's power relationally. Both of those forms of power are really, we look at those powerful individuals, what they do, and then emulate.
That's right.
Or
That's
leave.
right.
One of the two.
Completely.
All right. Laura, if people wanted to reach you, where's the best way to find you?
Yes, for sure. So I'm on LinkedIn, Laura Hamill on LinkedIn, but also my website, ParisPhoenixGroup.com. So Paris the city, Phoenix the city group.com.
Okay. Sounds lovely. Laura, thank you very much. Love the book. And everybody join us next week for another episode of Getting Out of Your Comfort Zone. And of course, go to our website, outofthecomfortzone.com. Leave us a comment. We'd love to hear from you anytime. See you next week.
Thanks.